Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Hand to hand. Hey, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to The Law Show on CL 650. A little George Brown. I never thought I'd get that on CL, but there you go. So good to be with Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. Your immigration and citizenship lawyers. And has your phone been ringing after this executive order?
The phone's been ringing. The emails have been coming in.
Yeah. All right. So before the break, we talked about the judge in Seattle, a Bush-appointed circuit judge. Is that what it is? That's correct. Stayed this executive order, and then it'll be appealed. And could it eventually go to the Supreme Court, do you think?
There's some possibility, although at the end of the day, this is a 90-day ban. That being said, I think the expectation is certainly for Syria and Iraq anyway, if none of the other countries, there seems to be some indication by the White House that they want to maintain this ban indefinitely beyond the 90 days. So the immediate effect, though, of the halt on the ban was, one, you had 60,000 canceled visas that were now effectively uncanceled and could be used. So people could now fly in. And because of that cancellation, the issue around green cards sorted itself out effectively because these people were allowed to come back. Since then, there's been some clarification that this was not intended to apply to green card holders, although...
And initially they said yes. And then
initially they said yes. So... Again, not a very well thought through.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I was watching CNN and one of the panels, they've got this endless loop of panels they have about these topics. And Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard professor emeritus, was talking about the way they should have done it is because they have a majority in Congress, they should have passed a law, put these things into law, which would have been a much higher test. It's not an executive order. It's been passed and it's now law in the United States. So that's what he thinks they might do next.
Yes, but Mr. Dershowitz, with the greatest of respect, I've been listening to him, as have you, as have everybody, for how many millions of years? I mean, the fact that he defended Klaus von Bülow how many years ago? Mr. Dershowitz's record on human rights issues is now very suspect. He likes the camera a lot.
I just threw it out there because he's well known.
In fairness, though, let's take his point and run with it a little bit. If this was going to be in a law, it would have to pass vetting by the Department of Justice. It would have to pass vetting by the Senate's various committees. I would question whether a law like this would have any chance of doing that if it was put to a briefing where people would be suggesting its constitutional nature being challengeable. The whole point of this was to keep the government, I think, in the dark. This was deliberately done by Trump and his people to be a sort of surprise. Here we are. We're going to do what we intend to do versus something that was really going to be well thought out and put into legislation.
Now, do you know in the Constitution it says we're getting a whole other thing? Can they just keep repeating these executive orders? Can they do another 90 days and another 90 days?
They can, but of course there's limits, and the court is going to start treating these things as permanent bans at some point if they're constantly coming up in an executive order.
You do the order again and one judge has already ruled it's unconstitutional. It's easy to take that precedent and go back and say we've got the exact same order, right?
I'm sure they would massage it, right?
Well, and maybe that's what they're going to do because, it just seems unnecessarily broad. But I think further to Alex's point, I think it was sort of, it was sent intentionally broad like that to sort of make a statement and to sort of show his base that he's trying to do what he said he was going to do.
Well, it all happened with all of these other executive orders in the first week. It's like, look what I can do right out of the gate. And this one is the one that blew up. A lot of the other ones were already forgotten about because this one's on the headlines every day.
The challenge, though, here, this was a complaint made about the expansion of executive orders. By no means is this an unusual thing. Executive orders have been done by many presidents, including President Obama, and he used them fairly aggressively, actually, at some points.
He closed Guantanamo using an executive order.
Well, it didn't work, though.
Yeah,
they didn't actually close it.
Of the Immigration Act, preventing the removal of illegal immigrants, he passed by executive order.
The dream people, yes, exactly. But, the challenge that you have with legislation in the United States, though, is you have to get it through Congress. Congressmen can't approve things in 2 minutes, even if it's your party. So if you want to get quick headlines and get this thing out at Twitter speed, well,
that's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it.
All right. So it's going to go through the court process. And what's your look in your crystal ball? I know you're not in the game of predicting things, but what do you think could happen?
Well, the net effect already has happened, and that is, if you're a person in the United States of Persian, Iranian origin, or Iraqi or Syrian Arab, regardless of your background, all of a sudden, your habits, your travel, everything is now front and center. So, sure, they're letting dual citizens in. They're letting green card holders in.
But for how long?
But every time those people cross, they're being scrutinized.
So they need to apply for a waiver, actually, right, for the green card holders, my understanding.
They need to apply for a waiver to be allowed into the United States. And in the case of dual citizens, if you just went to see your grandmother who was sick in Iran, now you're going to have to sit and have the 1 hour, 2 hour interrogation at the port of entry.
Is that automatic?
Well, it seems it's not automatic, but it's been happening, and we've been hearing stories about it happening all month long.
I mean, what the order has done, instead of saying everybody with a visa is allowed in, right? Unless the way it works at the border, the front line mostly is, well, the visa's been passed, so you must be okay to come in. So I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions, right?
Because the background check's been done.
I don't have to worry about it. Somebody's already vetted you. If something new comes up, okay, I'll ask a couple simple questions. Now we have the exact opposite effect. Is okay, you shouldn't be allowed in, and you have to convince the guy at the border that it's in the national interest of the United States that you come in, and you're not a threat to national security every time you come in. You've sort of lost that right, that presumption of innocence, just because of what passport you hold, right?
It's a horribly inefficient system. I mean, it's not alien to our experience here in Canada, where you have a dual operations mandate over a statute. So in Canada, Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, the dual mandate is between Canada Border Services on the operations side with Citizenship and Immigration Canada, now referred to as Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. So IRCC, which is the ministry that runs visa posts abroad, they do background checks, and they're supposed to coordinate those with the same agencies that Canada Border Services would be doing vetting with. And so that when a person comes with a visa in hand, they don't have to go through this vetting procedure a second time. What these executive orders, the clear implication is, State Department, you and your vetting procedure, we don't trust it. It's not good enough. Okay. So we are going to make Department of Homeland Security do it, or through Customs and Border Patrol, do it all over again once you go through the port of entry, regardless of the fact that it's already been done once. It seems remarkably inefficient.
Well, and for us, I mean, people come to us for a little bit of security and a little bit of sort of reduce their anxiety. So they're coming to us they want some sort of surety. When they show up, they make that flight, they're traveling for work, they're able to get in to either do the work, either to come in for a visit or move their families. What this has taken away is, you've got the visa, but what's going to happen when you get to the airport, right?
Yeah. So what are you saying to people who are Canadian citizens or are they're maybe not citizens yet, but they have status in Canada and they want to travel to the United States? If
they're coming from one of the 7 countries, I mean, I think our advice has been uniform: is don't travel. I mean, and we've had situations the other way where they are so they're American green card holder, for example, working in the United States, living there for years. Iranian, has been there 12 years, was planning to come up here. I got the order came in on the Friday. I was getting the text on a Sunday. What do I do? And I'm like, well, your Canadian visa is going to allow you to come in. You can come in and work up here. We've arranged that for you, but I don't know if you're going to be able to go home. So cancel the trip. Right, and that's sort of the advice generally. Is if you're going to try and go to the United States, you may be allowed in because if you've got a Canadian passport. But if you're born in Iran, you may be subject to a 2-hour scrutiny. Although they've sort of given us assurances, the State Department says that shouldn't be happening. But you've sent the message.
Stranger things could
happen. But they're not in charge of the process, so we don't know how much we can take their word at this, right? I mean, you have
the border people that are doing the vetting then. Right?
Exactly. And
it's not the State Department.
Yeah.
So the typical situation we're getting calls on is, hey, listen, I've got a business meeting in LA next week, and then I've got another business meeting in Chicago. I was just in Iran to see my sick uncle, or I was in Iran for, to see a family member, went for a wedding celebration. what's going to happen to me when I go to Chicago or when I go to the United States? Well, I mean, the reality is there's a risk, a quantifiable risk, that you're going to be put through extra scrutiny. So watch if you have to make a connecting flight. I mean, you're going to have to get to the airport early, and you're going to have to hope that they let you on the plane, because the assurances we've gotten so far do not seem to include hassling people for long periods of time. I mean, a good example of that is a story that we have that did its rounds in early February about the Norwegian politician or a former minister who was hassled at the U.S. Dulles Airport, kept for several hours. Norway isn't on the list. What happened was he gave a speech in Iran. And because he went on an official government function in Iran, they saw Iran stamp in his passport. He had to go through a couple of hours of grilling at the airport, the same way anyone who is, traveling up till now, if you were traveling in Somalia, the suspicion would be, what were you doing? Were you, going to an Al-Shabaab terrorist training camp? Well, essentially, that's what they did to this Norwegian politician, grilling him on what he was doing in Iran, and
he was there on official state.
And he was on official state business. Mm-hmm. If they're doing that to a Norwegian, I can't say that any Canadian citizen who's been to Iran would be treated any differently. So that's why we're giving the advice we're giving.
And what about? I'll tell you what. We'll take a break now. We want to talk about people actually crossing the border into Canada. We've had stories recently of Somalis walking across the border into Manitoba. We're also going to get into, what you deal with, and that's people in industry wanting to cross the border and how this executive order, this ban, is affecting the flow of people back and forth. And are you getting more calls, people wanting to come to Canada to say, listen, it's maybe a better place for me because I'm from one of these countries originally. We'll pick it up next. We're talking to Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law. They're in downtown Vancouver, immigration and citizenship lawyers. We'll continue the conversation next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.